King Solomon is remembered as the wisest man in the Bible, blessed by God with wisdom beyond any king before or after. Yet hidden in the shadows of his story are whispers of something far darker. Solomon was said to command spirits, summon angels, and bend demons to his will through forbidden magic. But what if that magic opened a door never meant to be opened? What if, in his pursuit of power, Solomon unleashed a curse that birthed something far older, far hungrier than demons themselves? Subscribe now, because what you believe about Solomon's legacy may not be the truth. And ask yourself, did King Solomon's forbidden magic create the first vampires? The Bible celebrates Solomon as a builder of temples, a man of peace, and a judge of unparalleled wisdom. Yet beyond Scripture lies a trail of texts that paint another picture. Ancient Jewish mysticism speaks of the seal of Solomon, a ring engraved with a mysterious symbol said to control angels and demons alike. With it, he commanded legions of spirits to raise stone, carve wood, and build his mighty temple. But what was this seal? Some claim it bore the name of God, a holy signet. Others, more troubling, argue that it carried sigils not from heaven, but from the abyss. In the apocryphal Testament of Solomon, he interrogates demons, binding them to his will. They confess their powers to strangle infants, to summon storms, to tempt souls into madness. And yet, Solomon does not banish them. He employs them. He harnesses them. This is where the line blurs. If demons could be bent, could their essence corrupt the one who wielded them? For in every pact, there is cost. Some texts suggest that the spirits Solomon bound did not merely obey. They lingered. They fed. His temple, glorious by day, may have been haunted by night with entities not of God, but of hunger. Here lies the earliest whisper of vampiric essence, not in blood-drinking corpses, but in beings that drained vitality. One passage describes spirits who drink the breath of men and leave them pale, weakened, and trembling. Is this not the seed of what later became vampire lore? Priests feared demons, but what Solomon practiced was something worse: coexistence with them. The great king may have thought he was mastering spirits, but perhaps he was only teaching humanity how to live alongside predators in disguise. Could it be that the first vampires were not peasants rising from graves, but spirits made flesh through the very rituals Solomon dared to use? The Bible tells us that Solomon's greatest downfall came not from war, but from love. He took hundreds of wives and concubines, many from foreign nations, whose gods were not the God of Israel. At their urging, he built shrines to Chemosh, to Molech, to Ashtoreth. Altars rose on hills that once belonged to Yahweh, and smoke from forbidden sacrifices filled Jerusalem. To most, this is recorded as idolatry, an act of spiritual betrayal. But some texts and traditions whisper something deeper. These gods, worshipped with blood, demanded not animals alone. They craved children. They craved the vitality of the living. What if these rites were not symbolic, but vessels for darker forces, fragments from later Rabbinical writings suggest that the life drained in sacrifice was gathered by spirits who took on form. Could it be that Solomon, through his lust and alliances, allowed entities into flesh, spirits of hunger, made incarnate? The altars were not simply false worship. They may have been gateways, legends preserved in Ethiopian and Arabic. Traditions speak of women in Solomon's court who were not entirely human, brides who fed at night, concubines whose eyes glowed in torchlight. Were these merely accusations to tarnish the king's reputation, or memories of something unnatural? The Book of Wisdom, attributed to Solomon but written later, contains cryptic verses. God did not make death, and he does not delight in the destruction of the living. Yet, it also warns of those who invite death with their words and deeds, who consider him a friend, and they pined away, making a covenant with him. Scholars often see this as metaphor, but could it be testimony that men and women in Solomon's circle literally forged covenants with death itself? Here lies the unsettling possibility. Vampirism as covenant, not curse. The spilling of blood upon pagan altars may have nourished something unseen, something that watched and waited. And if Solomon's wives were the conduits, then the king himself was complicit in unleashing them. Was his legendary wisdom corrupted not by folly, but by hunger? Hunger that was not his own, but that of the beings he empowered? When Solomon's reign began, Israel was united. His throne was gilded, his wealth legendary, and his wisdom unmatched. But by the end, his kingdom fractured, north against south, tribe against tribe. Scripture blames heavy taxation and forced labor. Yet some traditions whisper of another cause, the unseen shadow that followed Solomon's decline. Foreign gods had crept into Jerusalem. Pagan altars rose even in sight of the temple, and with them, something darker spread. A hunger that traveled not by armies, but by blood. Oral legends preserved in Judean villages speak of nights when entire households were found pale, drained, their bodies unmarked, cattle withered in fields, not by plague, but by something unseen. Travelers told of brides who walked in daylight, but whose eyes glowed red beneath the stars. As Solomon's empire fractured, so too did these whispers scatter across the ancient world. In the north, among the tribes of Ephraim, elders told of blood spirits that lingered in doorways. To the south in Edom, merchants claimed that Jerusalem's curse had followed the caravans. Even Egypt, once Solomon's ally through marriage, recorded tales of night phantoms who drank from the veins of slaves. Could it be that the collapse of Solomon's kingdom was not merely political, but supernatural? When the throne cracked, the curse seeped outward, uncontained. The temple, meant to be the dwelling place of God, may have become a gateway for something else, a fountainhead of entities that fed in secret. Later, Jewish mystics hinted at this when they wrote that Solomon's sins scattered sparks into the nations. Many see this as allegory, But what if those sparks were the seeds of vampirism? Not metaphorical sparks of rebellion, but literal fragments of entities born from blood sacrifice and forbidden covenant, the exile of Israel's tribes, the wandering of scattered peoples. Were these merely punishments of history, or attempts to flee a hunger no border could restrain? The fall of Solomon was not just the fall of a king. It may have been the release of a shadow that would haunt every land it touched. When Solomon died, his throne should have passed into stability, secured by the wisdom of his reign. Instead, it fractured. His son Rehoboam ascended, but within days the kingdom split. Judah to the south, Israel to the north. Scripture tells us it was because of arrogance and taxation. But what if there was another reason? Legends suggest that Solomon's forbidden practices had already poisoned the land. Wherever his altars stood, unrest followed. Priests spoke of strange winds rising from hilltop shrines, of shadows that crept across villages at dusk. Farmers whispered of children found pale in their beds, drained not of breath alone, but of vitality itself. To them, the division of the kingdom was not political. It was a divine judgment for a spiritual infection. Aramaic and Greek writings centuries later hint at this. Solomon's folly split the heart of Israel, and spirits of the night went forth into the nations. These spirits of the night resembled more than demons. They resembled the blood drinkers of Balkan and Near Eastern folklore that would emerge much later. Was this the moment vampirism spread beyond Jerusalem, carried into surrounding lands like a plague of whispers? Consider this. As the tribes scattered, they carried with them memory of Solomon's rituals, stories of his wives who never seemed to age, rumors of feasts where guests were found pale by morning. These tales were not buried with the temple. They were seeds sown across borders. By the time Israel fell to Assyria and Judah to Babylon, those seeds had rooted deep. Even the rabbis who tried to preserve Solomon's image could not fully hide their unease. In some Talmudic passages, he is depicted not as merely wise, but as one who knew the ways of spirits too well. Was that a reluctant admission that his power unleashed more than knowledge, that it loosed a hunger into the world that no king could control? The division of Israel was not only the collapse of a kingdom, it may have been the moment when the curse of Solomon's forbidden magic ceased to be confined to one nation and began its march through history. The first temple, glorious in its splendor, was hailed as God's dwelling on earth. Its walls shone with cedar and gold. Its courts rang with psalms and sacrifice. Yet not all who entered saw only holiness. Hidden beneath the hymns lay a darker, a shadow Solomon himself may have invited. According to preserved fragments of the Testament of Solomon, the king commanded demons to quarry the stone and raise the pillars. The temple was, therefore, not only a sanctuary, but a paradox, a house of God, built with hands enslaved by forbidden powers. What was meant as holy ground may have carried within its very stones a curse. Travelers in later centuries spoke of strange occurrences near the ruins. Shepherds claimed their flocks avoided the site. Priests whispered of unseen eyes that lingered even when the altar fires burned. Some suggested the temple itself became a feeding place, a structure where invisible spirits drew upon the lifeblood of those who came to worship. More troubling still, ancient mystics noted that Solomon's temple included chambers without windows, rooms sealed off from the light. Officially, these were storage for relics and treasures. Yet, rumors persisted of rituals held within, rites that sought not the blessing of God, but the obedience of spirits who drank from human breath and blood. The destruction of the temple centuries later did not erase this legacy. It spread it. Survivors carried stories of voices heard in the night, of children born pale who grew strong only after feeding on the weak. Some said the rubble itself was cursed, stones humming with a power that turned men hollow. Thus, what began as Solomon's monument of glory became, in whispers, the cradle of vampiric memory, not a place of salvation, but of sustenance. For beings the king once thought he controlled. The question remains, was the first temple a holy throne for God, or the first fortress of the undead? When Solomon's kingdom fractured after his death, the split was not merely political. The north fell to idolatry, the south to rebellion, and the temple that once bound heaven and earth became a contested shrine. But hidden beneath the wars and invasions, another shadow spread. A hunger whispered in the darker scrolls, carried with those who fled Jerusalem. Captives taken in raids told of strange ones among them. Prisoners who would not die of thirst, whose eyes gleamed with unnatural fire, whose lips bore traces of blood, though no wounds marked their flesh. Some called them cursed offspring of Solomon's foreign wives. Others said they were the spirits he once bound, now roaming flesh unchained. Babylonian chronicles, though fragmentary, hint at men without shadow who feasted upon the weak in the night. To the Babylonians, these were omens of destruction. To the Israelites in exile, they were memories of a king whose wisdom had opened forbidden doors. Even the prophets seem to gesture toward this terror. Isaiah speaks of wild goats dancing and night creatures settling among ruins. The Hebrew word Lilith is used, often translated as screech owl, yet carrying echoes of a devourer of life. Could it be that Solomon's corruption birthed lineages of beings who became the very foundation of such warnings? The exiles scattered these figures across empires. Some reached Persia, where stories of the Draugr, blood-drinking spirits, arose. Others were whispered in Greece, where tales of Lamia first surfaced, a woman cursed to drink the blood of children. These legends do not appear in isolation. They follow the roads carved by conquest and captivity. The irony is sharp. Solomon's temple was meant to bind the world to Yahweh's glory. Instead, his legacy of forbidden rites may have unleashed a hunger that outlived his kingdom, his people, even the empires that conquered them. Perhaps this is why his story remains one of paradox, a king of wisdom who also became the architect of ruin. And in the ruins, something older than demons found flesh to wear. When Solomon's reign ended, his empire fractured, and his temple became a battleground for generations of kings. The official story tells of political weakness, foreign invasions, and the wrath of God. But behind the curtain of history lies another possibility, that what Solomon conjured never died with him. The legends say his ring, the seal of Solomon, was buried with him. Others whisper it was stolen, hidden, or passed down through secret orders. Wherever it went, the power did not vanish. In the centuries that followed, stories appear across the Near East of pale wanderers, cloaked figures who drained life rather than wielded swords. They are described not as demons, but as servants of the king who walks without light. Was this Solomon's true inheritance? An empire of shadows, born from his forbidden mastery? By the Middle Ages, tales of vampires spread across Europe. But curiously, many of their attributes can be traced back to the spirits described in the Testament of Solomon, entities who choke sleepers, who thirst for breath and blood, who leave bodies pale and without decay. What if the vampire myth was not an invention of peasants, but the distant echo of Solomon's experiment with powers beyond his grasp? This is why the church suppressed the apocryphal texts, why rabbis avoided certain passages, why Islamic mystics spoke only in veiled terms about the enslaved jinn. They were not guarding piety. They were guarding terror, a terror that Solomon, in his hunger for wisdom and dominion, may have unleashed. And so we are left with the most haunting question of all. If the wisest man in history could fall prey to such power, what hope do we have? Was Solomon's legacy truly a temple of gold and cedar, or a hidden covenant with beings who would outlast him? The Bible records that God tore the kingdom from his hands, but perhaps God was also protecting humanity from a darker fate, a lineage of predators born from the seal of a king. So ask yourself, were vampires the cursed children of peasants and graveyards, or were they, from the very beginning, the creation of Solomon, the wisest man who ever lived?